Hi, so it's Nate Charles, managing partner of Charles Legal Services, back with another national security topic, legal topic to discuss with you. Today we're going to be talking about eminent domain and the CFIUS process and how those two things could be used to support the national security of the United States. This is in response to a question that was posed by my good friend and colleague, Alana. She read an article in CNN and it inspired her to ask about these particular topics. So we're going to get into it. So the article that Alana sent me was this. This is from CNN yesterday. That would have been July 23rd, 2022. And this article actually was about the placement of certain Chinese telecommunications technology in places where it could pose a threat to the United States. It wasn't necessarily about foreign acquisitions or foreign ownership of private property or real property, but it did inspire her to ask a very pertinent question. Alana's question was this: when foreign entities purchase land near important U.S. government facilities, why isn't that dealt with through eminent domain? Well, that's a very good question, but first we need to understand what eminent domain actually means. So eminent domain is actually an old and tried and true legal concept, and it's when a government, either in the United States, the federal government, or a state government, they're actually able to take a private person's, usually land, but some kind of property, usually land, for some sort of public purpose. Now, they have to do it for a public purpose, and there are certain requirements they have to meet before they can do it. Now, again, under eminent domain, the government can only take the land for a public use. There has to be a public purpose in taking the land. And moreover, they actually have to offer the person who owns the land just compensation. That's usually fair market value, but it'll generally be determined by a court. And it has to be done with due process. Now, and what that means is there's probably going to be some kind of an open hearing. And it's definitely the case that with certain transactions involving national security, the government might not want a public hearing. They might not want to come out and have a fulsome discussion about why they're concerned about a certain purchase of land. And also, if they are running around giving people fair market value for all of these parcels of land, that could, under the just compensation element, that could be a lot of money. It could be a very expensive proposition for the federal government or a state government to go running around handing out a lot of money to acquire land just so that some foreign entity doesn't acquire it and thereby potentially affect the national security interests of the United States. But all is not lost, okay? Under U.S. federal law, there is a certain process by which the President of the United States can review transactions involving foreign entities and foreign people acquiring U.S. property. That process is known as the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, or CFIUS. You'll hear it used a lot. It was created in 1975 by Gerald Ford by executive order, although it has been codified. Congress has passed several laws putting the CFIUS process into federal statutes. The latest was actually just back in 2018 when it expanded the scope of the transactions that were covered under the CFIUS process pretty significantly and made the mandatory reporting requirements a little bit more stiff. But the CFIUS committee it consists of the Treasury Department, Homeland Security, Commerce, Defense, State Department, the Justice Department, specifically the Attorney General of the United States, the Department of Energy, and the Department of Labor, although the Department of Labor doesn't get a vote, and then also the Director of National Intelligence, because obviously there's a lot of national security type information that goes into making these decisions, that goes into explaining why a certain transaction might be detrimental to the national security of the United States. So you always want the principal intelligence officer of the United States to participate in these types of conversations. Now again, CFIUS reviews a wide variety of transactions where a foreign person or a foreign entity could acquire some piece of property in the United States. That includes foreign acquisitions of U.S. companies, any sort of controlling interest in a publicly traded corporation. That's going to be reviewed by CFIUS. That was the original purpose of the regulations establishing CFIUS. real estate transactions potentially affecting national security, especially parcels of land that may be near like a military base or some other critical facility that relates to the national security of the United States. We want to make sure that those transactions aren't detrimental to the national interest, and so the president has the authority to review those. Transactions involving critical infrastructure. I know that we could do an entire video series on what is critical infrastructure, and in fact, we probably will at some point. But any foreign transaction or any transaction involving a foreign buyer that involves critical infrastructure is almost certainly going to be reviewed. And also, any transaction where a foreign actor is going to be acquiring certain intellectual property or technology, especially where those pieces of intellectual property or those ideas or those technologies are going to be export controlled, and we'll have a variety of videos on export control at a later date. But all those things are things that are likely to be reviewed by CFIUS. And if the president, by statute, if the president determines that one of those transactions is going to be detrimental to the national security of the United States, the president has the authority to shut it off. He can say, nope, you can't do that. So as we used to say in the military, what's the so what here? Why do we care about this? Well, if there are transactions involving foreign actors that are covered under CFIUS, covered under the CFIUS regulations, it is mandatory for companies to report those transactions to CFIUS so that they can be reviewed by the federal government in order to determine whether those transactions are going to be in the national security interests of the United States. However, the penalties are relatively light. We're talking a lot of these transactions involve big multinational corporations, large conglomerates, whose revenue is in the billions of dollars a year, even if not the trillions. And the fact of the matter is that the penalty for a CFIUS violation for failing to make a report or for not including a piece of material information in a report, the penalties are actually pretty light. It's only a $250,000 fine, and it's not even a criminal fine. It's a civil fine, a civil penalty. So it's not even covered under any sort of criminal statute. And the fact of the matter is, CFIUS is so unknown to the American public, so it's so arcane that many transactions that probably fall within the CFIUS's jurisdiction go unreported just out of sheer ignorance. So it's not a foolproof system. So at the end of the day, Atlanta wasn't wrong. The United States could use eminent domain to control transactions that could be detrimental to the United States, especially transactions involving foreign actors. But there are some disadvantages to using eminent domain. Specifically, the due process requirements would require there to be an open hearing on it. And it could be very, very expensive for the United States to have to go around purchasing all kinds of property and parcels of land just so that a foreign actor doesn't necessarily get their hands on them. But she's not wrong. Eminent domain is a tool that the government of the United States could use in a national security capacity. But we do have this other probably more useful process out there, the CFIUS process, in order to control transactions involving foreign actors and thereby protect the national security interests of the United States. Again, I'm Nathan Charles. I'm a former Navy SEAL, former federal prosecutor. I now own and manage Charles Legal Services. If there's ever anything that we can do, especially if you have a CFIUS type question or a national security law type question, that's our bread and butter. You can get in touch with me, Nate, at charleslegalandsecurity.com. Again, that's Nate at charleslegalandsecurity.com, all spelled out. 717-202-9407. We'd be happy to take your case and keep you on the right side of the law on these very important national security issues. Have a great day. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if there's ever anything that we can do to assist you, please reach out to us.